And we are live. Welcome back to the podcast, Nick Shultz. It's been a while since we were sitting in I was sitting in your apartment in Girona doing maybe one of the best podcasts we've ever done.
Oh,
The Nick
big
Shultz
call.
tale. It's up there. It's up there.
Yeah, when was that?
That was in a better time when I was in Girona, just cruising around, doing not much.
Freedom of movement.
hanging out with Lucas, hanging out with you, moving around. But if you haven't listened to it, I think it's our third most popular podcast ever. Nick Schultz, number one, interview with Caleb Ewan. Number two, interview with Rowan Dennis. Number three is Nick Schultz. So if you want to dig through the archives, you can find that online, or maybe might be still on the podcast apps. But we're here to talk about the World Championships today. You're good last night, Schultzy. Well, from what we could see.
Yeah, look, I was pretty happy with my ride personally, and as a team, we did, everything we could. When you've got a rider like Bling as your leader, and Richie as a leader as well, I think that's always going to get the most out of everyone on the team to sort of give their all. And it was fully focused on those guys, and when you know they're going to go to their absolute limit to try and finish it off, it certainly got the most out of me, that's for sure. And it was a great group to be a part of.
What was the plan? Like heading in, what was the job that you were given? What was the dynamic between Richie and Bling? How did you guys approach that?
So I guess the plan was probably more geared around Bling. Obviously the course was super hard, but anyone who knows Bling would know that he can just, when he's got the team committing to him, it's like he can just run through a brick wall. He can go so deep, when everyone's putting it in for him, that you can kind of bank on him going to the line, even though it was maybe not the perfect course for him. And you saw that on the last lap. Like you look at on the climb there, and he's bopping around with some of the best punchers in the world, and sort of just going to his absolute limit. And Richie was also obviously a co-leader for if the race was in a different sort of scenario. If it became more of like the pure climbers that were racing, then that's when Richie would have really become active, I think. But just the way the race went, it was such a hard and high tempo that, as you saw, no one really attacked until Alaphilippe went. There were no attacks, really. I mean, Pogačar had a little dig, but that was clearly a tactic as well. It wasn't like he wasn't having that dig as a race-winning move. It was just a super hard race of attrition that ultimately had the strongest guys left at the end, rather than sort of, false finals playing a part in the actual final and a heap of tactics. It was pretty straightforward in the end, just by virtue of the course. But the dynamic within the team was unreal, and Richie and Bling get along really well, which obviously helps. So it was actually just an amazing few days, and just a really good group that I think, because we were so well, got the most out of everyone.
It's good to hear that, because from all reports, there's been some tension in the warehouse in previous years with Bling and Guerin sprinting against each other for like fourth and fifth one year. So that's nice to hear that there was some good cohesion. Who was in charge? Because Brad McGee couldn't come over for obvious reasons, international travel, etc., etc. So who was in charge, and what was the dynamic like from that point of view?
Yeah, so due to the circumstances, I guess it made it pretty complicated for CA to sort of put together, particularly the staff for the race. So Matty Heyman was the director for the race. So that was familiar for me. Obviously, he's DS at Mitchelton, and he's brilliant. And I think
knows
he added
what he's doing.
He really just brought everyone together really well, and he was he was brilliant.
Can you remember? I don't know. I recall like whispers when you're an under 23. It's a bit more clear cut. Well, it was more clear cut when you were racing as a squad. Do you remember hearing whispers of like the world champs and people throwing down cash and who's the winner? And it's just like you're buying your spot to be the number one rider. Is that true? Or is that just all nonsense?
Not from any of my experience. No.
That sounds like a Euro sort of thing, like a Spanish team.
You reckon that's what the Belgies
are?
Maybe not the Belgies. The Spanish team in their 2001 cycling jerseys.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They need to change, don't they? No, So I haven't seen anything like that within the Australian team. I think as a national team and maybe just a nation in general, I think we're pretty renowned for like camaraderie and coming together and sort of working for a common goal. And I think that starts from very young. You go to a junior worlds, and as a junior team, you're already working for a select leader. Whereas the European nations, it's like all in. It's like, screw this. It's like we're all here at the junior worlds. We've each got an opportunity to win the world title, and that's great. But it's not like sort of, planting the seed that ultimately cycling is a team sport, and to get the best result, there's got to be sort of a common goal, and there's got to be a collective to get there. So I think Australians, and I think also the Brits, are very, very good at working together and sort of putting personal ambition aside sometimes. I mean, you just need to be realistic about it.
Yeah.
You when you're sitting in a room with certain guys, you can't just be like, oh, no, can't work for them. I want to have my own race. Like you've got to be realistic and see that actually, if you work for some of those guys, then it could be one of the best races of your life if they pull something spectacular off. And I pulled in on the last lap once my job was done, and got on the bus to watch the last 20K. And, when you're seeing the guys that you've been working for the whole race, like right up there in the pointy end when things are kicking off, you're screaming at the TV. I mean, it's an amazing feeling when you think that, wow, this is possible. Like, imagine if he crosses the line first or gets a medal like that. That's, incredibly satisfying to be a part of.
It is a weird dynamic though. You look at these national teams, you talk of, I think there is, you feel that strength in the Aussie nations and the Brits. But realistically, Bling's on your squad next year, which is handy. But if that wasn't the case, you would literally be doing the job for national pride. Because you have done your time in the French amateur scene. Can you see how that's not quite, the team cohesion isn't quite there?
Oh, certainly, particularly at the younger ages, I think, because everyone's fighting so hard to move up. I think they've got a lot better in the pro ranks. You look at the French teams now, and they've got a really good collective. And particularly yesterday, you look at their national team, and they rode a brilliant race, all for Alaphilippe, and they pulled it off. I think the biggest surprise yesterday, in terms of cohesion, was the Belgians. Like, that's an all-star team. All guys who in their own right probably could have been at the pointy end of the race. And I think that's the first time certainly in recent history that we've seen the Belgians really unite for one leader, and that was interesting because I mean, how do you tell Greg Van Avermaet that he's not leading the team, or Tish Benoot or Tim Wellens? I mean, that'd be a very hard team to manage, surely.
Mm.
But I guess if you're the French and you've got Julian Alaphilippe, but again, even if you are an absolute hitter, it's like, well, I'm not quite as good as Julian Alaphilippe, am I?
They absolutely killed it last night, didn't they? The French. They were.
Yeah.
It was good to see someone just light it up like that as a team.
Yeah, a few laps ago, they ripped it there and thinned out the bunch. I reckon 100 guys must have got dropped that lap. It was, they lit it up and just fully committed. And I think actually the silent assassin of that team was Guillaume Martin. He was pretty unreal. Watching that last lap, he sort of took a lot of pressure off Alaphilippe.
Was he one of your bros from the amateur scene back in France?
Yeah.
Guillaume?
I don't know him from a bar of soap, actually. I raced him a lot, but I don't know him at all.
Okay. I was hoping you could give us some insight because Keno was talking about he's some sort of he writes plays or something, like he's like a theatre
He's
man.
an intellect. I think he's a super intelligent guy. I don't think he's one of the boys as such in that team, but he's just so good and obviously committed to the team that you can't not have him on the team. But I know a few of those other guys reasonably well, and for sure they have a great atmosphere in their team as well.
I've got a question from Luke Parker on the winner, Julian Alaphilippe. Is he going to run the white bibs, the white world bibs? Is there any? Is that even a question? Of course he will.
You think so?
No, I hope he doesn't. There's only one guy really who could do that, and that was Chippo. But yeah,
you hope he stays traditional.
I think Gilbert ran some white bibs.
He did
every now and then.
Yeah, but it wasn't permanent. It was just
that's what I'm
on
saying.
the odd occagon.
Yeah, when the sun's out
for the big occasions, and whip out the white bibs.
No, I don't know. You never know, but I think he'll hopefully go black next.
Do you head back to France at all? Back to where you used to live?
No, I've only been back once since I had a race nearby a couple of years ago, and just stayed on for a couple of nights at an old teammate's house, and I haven't really been back to where I used to live since then. That was like 2018 or something.
I'd love to talk to a Frenchman about how big Julian Alaphilippe is, just how much of a rock star he is in that country.
He's big.
Is he?
The Tour de France last year, was he is a rock star since then. He was already very well known and a big sort of rider in the French's eyes, but in terms of touching people outside of the sport, what he did in the Tour last year, he's big, and now he will be even bigger. But I think ultimately, I think they care. The French outside of cycling and probably within care more about the Tour de France anyway. And it's 2 years in a row that he's had the yellow jersey, won stages, and he's very much a big dog in the French scene, and he's a pretty good world champion in the end. You'll see the jersey from January to October at the pointy end of the races, and that's pretty nice to see the rainbows.
Do you consume the French news, Shultz? Do you keep up to date?
I have a little bit of a look, sometimes at some of the French cycling news, just because they've got quite a lot of good journalists there actually as well.
Yeah.
And they're pretty up to date with what's going on in the world of cycling. I do check in every now and then.
What do you think of the finale anyway, Alex and Shultz? Like on the attack big time, and then that group behind was kind of weren't chasing full gas, but I mean, with Van Aert there, you're probably a little bit cautious of taking him to the line. But if you don't chase, and you don't win. It was a real tricky situation for those boys in that second group.
Shultzy, you were there.
Yeah. I find the dynamic of when there's a fast guy in the group, let's not work, weird. I don't understand that dynamic, because just because you're working with that guy doesn't mean it's going to come down to a sprint in the end anyway. But why not work together, try and catch Alaphilippe and then get rid of Van Aert? I'm not sure. What's the point of doing all that effort and then just not working with a guy who can maybe beat you in the sprint, but you're not even sure of it when you can't win the race? They often say the very best riders, the guys who win big, and there's only a few of them. It's only similar riders that we see winning the big monuments, and they're a special breed. And they always say they're prepared to lose to win.
Yeah,
and that's they're not riding for second place. They don't care about second place. That they'll play poker, and if it's it's like it's win or nothing. They don't care about the podium. And I think you look at that group behind, and it's just a missed opportunity. It would be amazing to have a medal in the world titles, but there's only one rainbow jersey, and to not work together to try and have the opportunity at winning it, I don't understand that dynamic. Because then he's just going to pump you for the silver medal.
Yeah.
Like,
no one remembers.
If you're worried about him, yeah.
It's interesting.
So it's interesting.
They weren't slow guys either. It wasn't like
it
was Wood, Van Aert and a bunch of pure climbers. Like,
no, I mean, Hershey
Kwiatkowski
showed in the tour that he's super quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. They could have worked together, got him back, and then started hitting him, like attacking left and right.
Yeah,
and then maybe it still would have come back to a sprint. But
and
at least
if they were to get him back, he would have been gassed for the sprint if they got him back. So there's one less guy as well. He played his card. His card was to attack, and he played the card. I'm all in, and if I lose, I lose. But it worked, didn't it? Like he took the risk, and he was just dangling there in sight for a while. And I think he was banking on the fact that they were going to play cat and mouse because Van Aert was there. He played it perfect.
I think the strongest guy probably won though, because that was when he went. That was the time to go. No one could follow the move. So
yeah,
like I said earlier, I think we just got like a super world champion that's going to be in the front all year next year, winning races, and it's going to be pretty cool to see. And also, you mentioned those guys that were in that second group all have that kind of killer instinct. Not too sure about Hershey just yet, because he's so young, but all those guys in that group, except for Fuglsang, because he wasn't at the tour, won a stage of the tour.
Yeah,
which was
hot group.
Hot group. Yeah,
it was.
I saw a interesting tweet from Mel Hoskins, Rowan's wife, around Roglic being in the group. And obviously teammates with Wood Van Aert. Obviously Wood Van Aert's been chopping turns for him for the last 3 weeks in the tour. Like, bro, do you want to, you're not going to win this. Do you want to roll through?
We were talking about that as we were watching it too. And we were all speculating, like, when's Roglic going to do a burner to pull it back for Van Aert? But I think the intention was there. I just think he was buggered. Because I don't think Roglic was in that group thinking, I'm going to wrap up the sprint here. But I just think he was cooked. And he just seems like the type of guy that if he could have, he probably would have wanted to help try and bring it back. But who knows? I mean, ultimately, I think as bike riders, and depending on the nation, like we discussed before, if someone from my team who was in a different country asked me for some help on the world titles, I'd tell them to get stuffed. I'm at the Worlds to represent Australia and work for the Australian leader. I don't really care if the Australian leader's on my trade team or not. I'm loyal to the jersey I'm wearing. Maybe Rudzik was thinking that too. Like, he's had the winner of the Tour de France just trying to set him up all day, and a whole team working around him. They were at the front all day. And maybe he thought if he would have worked for Van Aert, it was disrespecting the rest of the Slovenian team. So you never know. Maybe he did have the legs, but he just was loyal to Slovenia.
Only cycling could throw up some sort of conundrum like that, though, really. Working for two different teams in two different weeks. It's bizarre. There was I was scrolling the internet this morning, and Eddie Plancart, who is a former winner of Tour of Flanders and Paris-Roubaix, just an old Belgian guy. He quoted on this Roglic and Van Aert saga. He said, "If I were Van Aert, I wouldn't ride another meter on the front again for Roglic." So clearly, there's some heavy thoughts coming from the Belgian public on the fact that he didn't get any assistance from Roglic. But a lot of these Belgian old guys seem very opinionated, and they don't mind coming out in the press and just lashing people, do they?
Well, I always love waiting for Eddie Merckx's reactions on Remco and the young Belgians. It's always brilliant to see what Eddie has to say. It's like this. They still just want to be the greats, and they
want to be as relevant as possible for as long as possible.
It's just like, yeah.
That's how they get their front page on the paper, on the local Ghent
in Het Nieuwsblad
spread. Yeah. Shultz, how hard was that climb, or those climbs, that circuit in general?
Yeah, look, I think the TV didn't do justice to how hard the course was, because watching the women's race the day before, I sort of thought, gee, doesn't look as hard as what it felt, doing the recon. It was like super steep, super slow climbs. The gear ratio I used was a 36-30. And almost every lap I was in the 36-30 up the climbs. Except for the couple of laps where they really ripped it. And, every lap was hard up there. Even the easy laps, it was one of those climbs that it was so steep. Just to ride up it, you're riding it at nearly 400 watts to just going over there, controlling the brake. So it was super hard. But the beauty of the circuit was there was so much going on. It was so narrow. There were so many lefts and rights, up, down. The race went super quick. All of a sudden, you're 4 hours in, and you're like, oh, okay, this is going to be on now. Like, it's really going to kick off now. We're getting to the end of the race. Whereas sometimes, a race of 250K or anything 200 plus, there's that moment of lull where you're just like, waiting to switch on. You're just sort of you want the race to sort of evolve into being the race for the final, but it sometimes just sort of lags. But there was none of that at all on this circuit. It was just no time to sort of dawdle.
That was going to be my next question, because 6.5 hours on a circuit, that must be boring at times. I know you've just said that it wasn't the case this time around, but I mean, doing a 250K race is enough. A to B, that's boring enough. But on a circuit, you must just be thinking this is just going to be death for 4 hours. You just got to stay focused.
Yeah, and I think that's often probably the thing that separates the really good classics riders from the rest of us is that they're so good at going through the different phases you go through in such a long race. I mean, I would be very surprised if the whole day yesterday, Alaphilippe was like, "Oh, I'm on the best day. I'm on the best day of my career today." I don't think he would felt like that from kilometre zero to the end. There's so many sort of ups and downs to a race of that distance. I remember thinking yesterday on the second lap, like, oh, this is really grippy. Like, if it stays like this, I'm going to be done before I'm even supposed to clock onto my job. And then you ride through it, and the race is actually getting harder, and you start feeling better and better. So it's like it's pretty. I think those guys are so good at just sort of accepting that you don't feel good at times through a 7-hour race, and sort of keeping the self belief.
Do you get like used to 260 kilometer, well, not 260, but over 200k events? I remember turning under 23 and like it was like 180. It's like, what? Like, it's so far. It's such a long race. But then eventually it just becomes the norm. When you turn pro, is like 200 clicks just like, oh yeah, next. Just get on with it.
I think 200 is comfortable. Well, not comfortable, but I think it is kind of norm. But it is very true. When you hear commentators say the sort of mystery when you go over the 200 mark, how different people react. Because you don't do it often. It's only in one-day classics often, that you're doing the really long races. And if it is a really long stage in a Grand Tour, it's ridden so differently to a classic. The pace that was getting ridden after 30k yesterday is not going to be the same pace that's getting ridden on a 250k Grand Tour stage, because everyone's leaving everything out there for one day, and the breakaways going as hard as they possibly can, because they know more or less they're never going to go to the line, so they're just going out there and riding a time trial for as long as they can. And you see that the break had 7 minutes, and within like one lap they lost 6 minutes because the lights just went out. And it wasn't like the peloton necessarily really upped the pace, and I think that's as the race gets longer, it becomes more of a mystery. And I certainly notice it when you start getting up around that 200k mark. You just start to feel like you can't fuel enough. You sort of feel that borderline hunger flat coming on, and it certainly plays on your mind. Maybe you get out of the saddle and you get those little twitchy sort of pre-cramps, and you're like, "Oh, don't feel them often." Just little things like that. But for sure, I think that's also why a lot of the guys in that front group as well were not the 20-year-olds that we're seeing dominating a lot of the races at the moment. They have a bit more experience at those really long classics, and maybe it will be that we see the 21-year-olds able to come in and dominate the stage races, because stage races seem to be leaning towards the shorter stages a little bit, the shorter, more aggressive and exciting stages. But it'll be interesting to see whether we'll see 20, 21-year-olds dominating Liège-Bastogne-Liège or San Remo as soon as they turn pro, because you just don't have the exposure to racing 250k out of juniors or out of under 23s. Now, obviously,
I was a bit surprised to see
the guys coming through are freaks.
I was surprised to see Hershey in the front, coming off the back of the tour, being so young, and the team were obviously committed too, because Switzerland were doing a little bit of work on the front. And I was thinking, surely this can't be for Hershey, but it was, and he delivered with a bronze medal.
Yeah, he's incredible. I mean, also, I think like credit to a guy like that. As soon as the breakaway went, and we'd had the lull in the bunch, they would let them get a decent gap. Switzerland were the first team to go up to the front. So he's backing himself. The team's backing him. First senior world championship, I reckon. Straight off the Tour de France. Massive crash there in the last week. He's still covered in webbing. And he's just like, you know what? I'm on. I'm up for it. And I remember seeing him with like 3 laps to go, and I thought, oh, he doesn't look good. Like they've just ridden all day, and I thought he didn't look that good. I saw him grimace a little bit. I'm like, oh, yeah, don't see that often. And then I'm watching it the last 10K. I'm like, Jesus, God, I thought he was done 40K ago. So just again one of those special guys that can pull it out, and there's just something different in those special riders' heads. I think they got something that the majority of us don't have in their psychology, I reckon.
It's something we've been talking about a lot lately, with the trend of now 20, 21, 22-year-olds just dominating the pro ranks of the sport. Can you wrap your head around it, Schultzy? Like, is it a bit like, for me, and I think a bit for Campbell, it's like we were so far away from even winning an under 23 race, let alone a world tour race at 21. And these guys are going out and featuring in the top 3 worlds.
I find it incredibly difficult to wrap my head around, because I think I was even further off winning an under 23 bike races than you guys were when I was 21, and just to see how they can just step in straight out. I mean, some of them are turning pro out of juniors, like Remco. It's just I was like most of us when we do our first 1 or 2 years under 23, you get your ass handed to you in those races. So it is really difficult to sort of understand how it's possible, but I think it is awesome. It's pretty cool, and I think it sort of adds a new dynamic to racing. Like it's so aggressive, and the way young guys race is a lot more like do or die. And I Pogačar at the Tour was incredible to watch, just the way he took it on. And maybe you wouldn't see that from a guy who'd been in the World Tour for 10 years. So I think it's great for the sport. But I do think that their careers will potentially be shorter. Like I don't know if these guys that turn pro when they're 20 are going to be riding when they're 35 in the World Tour. But that's probably more from a psychological side rather than physical. I mean, at 21, you've just won the Tour de France. Your life changes. Can you sustain that type of stardom for 15 years? Like it's a sport with long careers as it is, and with so much demand. Like maybe if you're a basketball player with an immense amount of stardom at 20, it's not quite the same training load as a guy who's trying to win the Tour de France. So he's balancing stardom, training, all the commitments that go with being a superstar. I don't know how sustainable that is in the long run, but it's certainly pretty cool to see. And I think it will just become more and more common. We say, they're freaks, but I was in Italy last week doing some one-day races, and the last one of the 3 was a super hard race. It was a massive climb in the middle, and it sort of all came back together for a reduced bunch sprint. And the podium were all from 98, I think, 98 or 99. It was like Ethan Hayter, one other rider, I can't remember his name, and Rob Stannard. And the race was over 200K, good field. And so it's I think it will become more and more common. It's just kind of the way the sport's evolving with training, and Yeah, I guess it's always the way, isn't it? Like, sort of each generation becomes more scientific, more knowledgeable with certain things, and like not just within sport. Like it's how the world progresses. Young people come through and push the boundaries, and push for change. So it's. I reckon it will become more and more common.
Yeah, I mean it's something that's a big talking point at the moment. And Cadell also mentioned, like you said, that he thinks that we had Cadell Evans on the podcast last week. He reckons that careers are going to become shorter as well, just because being at that high intensity is just so hard to sustain. But I also think that when one or two of the guys can come in and start dominating in their first year, then it just gives confidence for other guys to follow in their footsteps. I think there's a lot of that as well. Just like anything, if you see someone that was in your position move up and start dominating, you think you can do the same thing. So I think there's going to be a fair bit of that as well.
I think also from the team's perspective, I mean, I can't imagine 10 years ago a team having a Neo Pro come on and being like, right, we're going to back this guy for the tour. That must have just not existed. That can't have. But now you look at the way teams are signing riders, and you're seeing like, 18-year-old signs 5-year contract. And it's like, whoa, like 5-year contracts didn't exist 10 years ago either.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's also the confidence from the team as well. Backing young riders, which I don't think would have had an opportunity in 2010 to ever lead a team until they were, senior statesmen.
Let's not also forget how good Wood van Aert was last night. Like the caliber of riders he was with. Oh my goodness. It was so clutch. Just any position where he was slightly out of place, he just fixed it. Just, all right, draw this guy back. Alaphilippe goes whack. Like that was the only one that eventually distanced him. But even then, he's still with some of the best climbers in the world. Like it was wild.
It was incredible, and he, like, the versatility that guy has is just unreal. And I think even someone like Hershey and Alaphilippe, like these are the modern era of riders that are just good at everything. And again, I think that is also part of the way the sport's going, and everyone's kind of got to be versatile, and it's probably also driven by the fear of the young guys coming up and taking spots. So everyone's training harder, and everyone wants to keep their jobs to keep a spot on a team being taken from a 19-year-old who can do everything.
Matthews was 7th. Was there good energy in the bus or the hotel after? Was everyone happy with the performance, or was Bling happy? What was the vibe like?
Oh, everyone was stoked. The only person with any sort of disappointment was Bling. But again, I think that just speaks volumes of the type of rider he is. He wanted to win, and I think he's a prime example of a guy that lays it on the line to win, and anything but the win is not that relevant to him. And he was disappointed in the ride. But I think that was probably more just in the heat of the moment. I would hope that once he actually looks at how he rode and where he was just incredible. So yeah, the vibe on the bus afterwards was brilliant. I mean, we weren't sitting there asking the question of what could we have done differently to improve the result. It was, we did everything we could. We had a leader who did absolutely everything they could, and that was we got beaten by some better guys, and that's you've got to accept that sometimes when it's a 1 day race, and there are everyone's prepared for it, and there are going to be sometimes guys who are better, and what can you do? If you've done the perfect race, there's 6 guys who get away from you. You can't be that disappointed. I think it would be different if we, screwed up the plan or rode a crap race as a team, and then Bling got 7th. I think, he'd have a right to be annoyed, and the directors would have a right to be asking questions like, what happened? Why weren't you at this point when that was part of the plan? Or but there was none of that, so it was a really good atmosphere, and everyone was really, really happy.
Because you look at the guys that finished in front of him. I mean, even on his best day of climbing, he's probably not going to be able to climb with any of those guys. So I think 7th is a massive result.
Let's not forget that.
Yeah, I mean, and then you look at the group he came with, like he's with Valverde,
Caruso, Schachmann.
The group that he came into the line with was also just a pure climbers. Like it was an amazing group also. So, and they weren't good enough to go with those front 6.
Let's not forget the man that was with him though, Nicholas Shultz. Like you were really mixing it with the big boys. Like you saw when Bling was just positioned perfectly heading into the bottom of the climb. You were around the mark. It was a big ride. Yeah,
I mean, that was my role to basically be there once Durbo had clocked off, and I think a lot of credit has to go to Durbo because he'd ridden the TT, and it was kind of like, well, if Durbo covers the first 100K, that's awesome. Durbo did 200K, just about of looking after Bling. So I got to lay reasonably low, sort of just being around and doing some of the little things that you don't see on TV, whether it's biddens, the odd little bit of moving up. But I didn't have to put my face in the wind until you probably saw me, with probably just touching on 40 or 50K to go or something, and it was like my final peeler. That was a really key point to come into that second last climb at the front, and yeah, that was max effort to get them there and then check out. But it was a good day.
Do you ever think like how, like if the Oz team, let's switch roles around, Bling's doing the job for you, the whole team's doing the job for you, like where would have you featured? Where would have you found yourself in that back end?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, a prime example is yesterday. Before I really hit the wind, I thought, this is going all right. I feel pretty good. Might get round this next lap. But the way the race was going, it was like, okay, no, there's need to do my sacrificial move now because it's heating up big time, and this is going to go from a 40 or 50 rider group to a 20 rider group now. Like next hill, this is it. And so from feeling quite good to then going and riding, I think the Belgies were riding, and just to sort of put my nose in the wind and try and hold the line next to them. From feeling quite good, I went to feeling like completely cooked in 5 minutes. So it's a difficult one to answer. And there's a whole lot of other aspects that come into it. I'm not very often leading a team, and that's quite difficult to shoulder pressure when you've got a bunch of guys who are working just for you. That's not an easy thing to handle, and that takes away energy. So it's look, I probably wasn't going to get around the the race at the pointy end if the team was riding for me. I think that's easy to answer.
It also shows just the kind of skill that Bling has as a quick guy. Like, to be able to feature in that back end is wild. Him and Wood Van Aert, so impressive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we talk about Wout van Aert, but the next most outstanding ride of the day was Bling. You just look at coming into that last final crunch time climb. You look at that group. There's two guys who stand out: Wout van Aert and Michael Matthews. They're just two guys who, in theory, you just think, they shouldn't be in that group.
Yeah,
but they are.
Is there energy around him coming home, back to Mitchelton Scott next year?
I certainly think so. I mean, having a rider who, like that, who lays everything on the line, values so much value in a team laying it on the line for him. It's incredibly motivating. You see sometimes with leaders in other teams or whatever. Sometimes they'll have a team just ride all day for them. It gets a little bit hard and they just easily just swing off and day done. And it's like, where was the fight? You just had 7 guys riding their asses off for you for 6 hours and it just got a little bit hard and you've sat up. Like, okay, if you don't have the legs and you get dropped, you get dropped. But it's, it's that whole go down fighting. And I think Bling is just incredible at that. He leaves absolutely everything out there, every single race. And I'm certainly feeling a lot of positivity with him coming to the team, and really looking forward to putting it on the line for him for sure. And I'd imagine a lot of riders and also staff are feeling that too.
Last one from me, Shultzy. What's next? This season's just a bit of a wild one. Racing, bang, bang, bang. Ardennes this week coming up.
Yeah, so I'm just still in my hotel room here in Italy, and I'll be packing up soon to head to the airport and fly straight to Belgium. Flesh Wallones on Wednesday, so quick turnaround there, and then Liège on Sunday, Brabants de Pijl Wednesday, Amstel Gold Saturday, and then a quick little stint back at home, and then the Vuelta to wrap things up.
Jeez. So what's that? Does the Vuelta go into?
It's been dense.
Does it go into November? Does it go quite into November?
Mate, it finishes on the 8th of November.
That's deep into the season.
Mm.
Can you imagine how cold it's going to be in those
deep
Spanish desert stages? Could be icy in there.
Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it.
Let alone the Ardennes next week.
Look, I think
It's almost October.
Dry day coming up in the next month. It's going to be a lucky day if there's any sunshine for any race for the next month.
Besides the obvious that there's no crowd at the events, when you actually get to the start line, you're lining up, is there anything that's different? Is it just all right, we're just on here, we're racing? Is there any notable difference between your first ever or our first ever COVID season?
You wear a mask until about 2 minutes before the start, so you're on the start line with a mask on. That's pretty different. But otherwise, not really. I think the bubble system's working pretty well. You've got to get a lot of COVID tests. That's new. So there's always organising when you're going to get the test done, and a little bit of stress before you get to the race. But once you're actually at the race, aside from wearing a mask everywhere, you're on the massage table, you're wearing a mask. You go up to get a second round of food, you put your mask back on to go get your main meal or to go get a water from the fridge. But I mean, living in Spain, I'm pretty used to that anyway. It's compulsory to have a mask on everywhere at all times. So it's kind of become the normal now, and it feels alright. But there are also crowds. It seemed like quite a lot of people on the climbs yesterday. So it doesn't feel super different. It's probably the crowds are just obviously scaled back quite a lot.
Very good. Well, thanks, Shultz. We'll let you get back to it. Thanks for coming on the potty again. Good luck for the rest of the season. And as I mentioned at the start, if you haven't already, check out Shultz, the interview we did with Shultz last year. We touched on his full story, the way that he made it to the world tour. It's one of our best podcasts we've ever done. So thanks again, Shultz, and all the best for the rest of the year.
Thanks, Shultz.
No worries. Thanks heaps, guys.
See you, mate.